What happened when the United States women's basketball team faced New Zealand was not your typical international game, and I really need you to sit with that for a moment before we go any further. Because what we witnessed on that court was something that goes so far beyond a regular basketball result that it almost feels strange to even describe it using normal sports language. The final score was 101-46, and I am asking you to genuinely stop and think about what that number means. Not just as a sports result, but as a reflection of where women's basketball is right now and where it is clearly heading in the very near future. A 55-point margin of victory in an international basketball game involving professional and elite level athletes is not something that happens by accident. It is not a matter of one team having a good night while the other had a bad one. It is a reflection of a massive and growing gap in quality, preparation, and most importantly, in the kind of generational talent that only comes along once in a very long time. The mainstream sports media is going to do what it always does in these situations. They are going to give you the polished and sponsor-friendly version of events. They're going to talk about a dominant performance and a great team effort and all the usual phrases that sound good in a highlight package but do not actually tell you anything meaningful about what you just watched. But anyone who truly understands what is happening in women's basketball right now, anyone who has been paying close attention to the politics and the personalities and the power struggles that have been playing out behind the scenes for the past couple of years, those people watched that game and immediately understood that what they were seeing was something much bigger and much more significant than a simple blowout victory against a lower-ranked national team. For months now, the people in charge of Team USA and the broader WNBA ecosystem have been playing a very carefully managed and very politically motivated game, and the whole point of that game has been to protect the established order, to keep the familiar names and faces at the top of the pecking order, and to slow down or at least manage the rise of the new generation of players who are threatening to completely overturn the way things have always been done. They have used every tool available to them to try and keep the most exciting and most commercially valuable player in the sport today operating in a limited and carefully controlled way. And for a while, it seemed like that strategy might actually work, but the dam has finally broken completely, and there is simply no putting it back together again. The moment that Caitlin Clark's name was officially written onto that starting lineup card, the entire dynamic of international women's basketball shifted in a way that feels permanent and irreversible. And Stephanie White, I think you already know exactly how you felt when you saw her name on that starting lineup. And I think the discomfort that caused in certain circles tells you everything you need to know about the politics that have been surrounding this situation for so long now. But let us talk about what actually happened on the court, because the performance itself deserves a thorough and detailed breakdown rather than just broad statements about how good it was. Caitlin Clark played 23 minutes in that game, and in those 23 minutes, she put up 14 points and handed out 6 assists. And if you are the kind of person who looks at those numbers and thinks that sounds good but not extraordinary, then I need you to understand that you are looking at the wrong thing entirely. The raw statistical output is almost beside the point when it comes to evaluating what Clark actually does to a basketball game, because the most important and most impactful thing she does are the things that do not show up in any box score anywhere. What she does is she pulls the attention of the entire opposing defense toward her like a magnet, constantly and relentlessly from the moment she crosses half court. And she does it because every single defender on that court knows from painful experience that if they give her even a fraction of an inch of space, she will make them pay for it immediately and without hesitation. And what that constant defensive attention creates is enormous amounts of open space for every single one of her teammates, space that they would never have if a lesser player was running the offense. And the players around her are smart enough and skilled enough to take full advantage of that space every single time it opens up. That is the thing that is genuinely hard to quantify, but impossible to ignore if you are watching with any level of understanding. And it is the reason why the 14 points and 6 assist numbers, impressive as they are on their own, represent only a fraction of the actual value she brought to that game. And then we have to talk about what happened when Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers were sharing the court at the same time, because that combination is something that women's basketball has genuinely never seen before, and it is something that the rest of the world is going to be dealing with for a very long time. These are two players who seem to think about the game in almost exactly the same way, two basketball minds that process information at an incredibly high speed and make decisions faster than most players can even perceive the situation developing. And when you put them on the same court together, the result is something that looks almost unfairly easy to the casual observer, even though what they are actually doing requires an extraordinary level of skill and basketball intelligence. Bueckers logged a team-high 24 minutes and finished the game with 7 points, 3 rebounds, and 3 assists. And just like with Clark, those numbers are really just a starting point for understanding her actual contribution. Because the way she moves the ball, the way she keeps the entire offensive system running smoothly, the way she makes sure that every single player on the floor feels involved and gets their opportunities, that is the real value she brings. And it showed up clearly throughout the entire time she was on the court. When you have two players operating at that level of basketball intelligence simultaneously, with that kind of shared understanding of how the game should be played and how to exploit the weaknesses in any defense, it creates a situation where the opposing team simply cannot win, no matter what adjustments they try to make. And that is exactly what New Zealand experienced throughout that game. Now here's where we need to get honest and direct about something that has been a topic of conversation and a source of frustration for a lot of people who are paying close attention to how Team USA is being managed. And that is the continued decision to keep Chelsea Gray in the starting lineup. I want to be absolutely clear that Chelsea Gray has had an incredible career and has done things in professional basketball that deserve enormous respect and recognition. She has championship experience. She has been one of the best point guards in the WNBA for a long time, and none of that history disappears or becomes less meaningful just because we are having this conversation. But the reality of where women's basketball is right now, the pace at which the game is being played, the speed at which decisions need to be made, the physical demands that the modern style of play puts on every player on the court, all of that points to a very clear and uncomfortable truth, which is that continuing to put players in the starting lineup based on what they have achieved in the past, rather than what they are actually capable of delivering right now, is a decision that is going to hold this team back from reaching its true potential. The visual difference between the periods of the game when Clark is out there running the offense and the periods when the older guards are handling those responsibilities is not subtle or hard to see. It is completely obvious to anyone watching with open eyes. When Clark is directing the offense, the ball moves with a speed and a purpose that puts the defense under constant pressure. Decisions come quickly and correctly, and the entire team looks sharp and connected and dangerous. When that changes, the whole system slows down in a very noticeable way. The defense gets time to set up and organize, and the offensive opportunities that were there before start to disappear. That contrast is not a criticism of any individual player. It is simply an honest observation about where the game is right now and what it demands from the people playing it at the highest level. Now let us talk about something that should genuinely concern every defensive coordinator currently working in the WNBA, and that is the very significant and very deliberate work that Caitlin Clark has been putting in during the offseason to expand her offensive game in ways that are going to make her dramatically harder to guard than she already was. If you thought she was already a nightmare to deal with before, if you thought that having to respect her shooting from 30 feet out and beyond was already putting your defense in an impossible position, then I really need you to understand what she has added to her game, because it changes the entire calculation for anyone trying to figure out how to slow her down. She has developed a genuinely effective and biomechanically clean mid-range game, and she has specifically been working on snaking the pick and roll, which means using the screen to get just enough separation and then stopping suddenly and pulling up for a mid-range jump shot before the defense can recover. And she is doing it with real accuracy and real consistency, which means that the last remaining defensive strategy that teams were using to try and limit her effectiveness, which was to drop back in pick and roll coverage and give her the mid-range area while protecting against the three-pointer, is now completely gone as a viable option. When a player who already demands your full defensive attention from 30 feet out suddenly proves that she can also hurt you efficiently from 15 feet, there is simply no correct answer left for how you guard her. You cannot go under screens because she will stop and shoot the mid-range. You cannot go over screens and chase her to the three-point line because she will use the screen and attack the paint or find the open teammate. You cannot load up your defense to take away her passing lanes because she is accurate enough from distance to punish that too. She has systematically closed off every exit route that defensive coaches had been using, and the coming WNBA season is going to look very different for a lot of teams as a result of that development. I genuinely cannot overstate how significant this addition to her game is and what it means for anyone who has to prepare a defensive game plan against her. And all of this individual brilliance and all of this basketball development matters not just for winning games, but for something much larger that is currently unfolding in women's basketball, which is the fight over money, and specifically over how the television and broadcasting revenue that the sport is generating gets divided up between the league and the players. The players are currently in the middle of very serious negotiations over the collective bargaining agreement, and those negotiations are fundamentally about whether the people who actually create the product, the athletes who play the games and draw the viewers and attract the sponsors, are going to receive a fair share of the enormous and growing financial pie that women's basketball is becoming. And in the middle of all of that, Caitlin Clark sits as the single most important factor in the entire equation because she is the player that drives the television ratings. She is the player that brands and sponsors line up to be associated with. She is the player that casual sports fans who might not otherwise watch women's basketball tune in specifically to see. And every single time she puts on a performance like the one she delivered against New Zealand on a high-profile international stage, she is making the case louder and more clearly than any press release or negotiating document ever could that the financial structure of women's basketball needs to fundamentally change to reflect what she and players like her actually contribute to the sport. Every time she pulls up off the dribble and knocks down a shot in a game that millions of people are watching, she is demonstrating her market value in real time in a way that nobody can argue with or dismiss. But going back to the game itself, and specifically to what the second unit did when they came in off the bench, because this is something that deserves a lot more attention than it has been getting in the general conversation about this performance. When a team has already built a commanding lead through the brilliance of their starting lineup, the job of the bench unit is usually to maintain that lead, protect what has already been built, and not let the opposing team back into the game. What Team USA's bench did against New Zealand was something completely different and considerably more impressive than that, because they did not just maintain the lead, they absolutely poured fuel on the fire and extended the advantage even further, and they did it with a level of energy and aggression and individual excellence that was genuinely remarkable to watch. Ryan Howard was the standout performer among the second unit players and honestly might have been the standout performer of the entire game when you look purely at individual efficiency and output. She finished with a team high 18 points, and she did it while shooting 6 of 10 from three-point range, which works out to 60% accuracy from beyond the arc on a high volume of attempts. And that is a number that would be extraordinary in any context, but is particularly impressive when you consider that she was coming off the bench in an international game with real pressure and real stakes attached to it. Howard was playing with a kind of cold and focused confidence throughout her time on the court, punishing every single defensive mistake New Zealand made with immediate and accurate three-point shooting. And the psychological effect that has on an already struggling defense is significant because once a shooter gets that hot in a game, the defenders start to press and panic, and that leads to even more mistakes and even more open shots, which is exactly the cycle that unfolded during Howard's time on the court. And right alongside that perimeter shooting brilliance, you had Angel Reese bringing a completely different but equally important kind of impact through her physical presence in the painted area. Reese played 17 minutes, and during that time she scored 9 points, pulled down 4 rebounds, and made life genuinely difficult for the New Zealand front court in ways that went beyond just the statistical contributions. She was physical and aggressive and relentless in the way she attacked the offensive glass and the way she established her position in the post. And by the time her stint on the court was done, the New Zealand big players looked like they had been through something genuinely exhausting, which is exactly the kind of impact you want from a player in a role. Add to all of that Monique Billings going 5 for 7 from the field for 10 points and 6 rebounds, and Kiki Iriafen shooting at an extraordinary 66% from the floor while finishing with 9 points and 8 rebounds. And what you have is a bench unit that performed at an elite level from top to bottom and contributed massively to what ended up being one of the most comprehensive team performances in recent memory for Team USA. Every single player who came into that game made a meaningful positive contribution, and that kind of collective excellence from the entire roster is a reflection of the quality and the depth that this team possesses right now. The defensive performance also deserves its own dedicated conversation because holding any team of professional and elite level athletes to just 46 total points across 4 full quarters of regulation basketball is an achievement that should not be taken for granted or glossed over in the excitement about the offensive numbers. That kind of defensive dominance does not happen by accident. It requires everyone on the court to be completely locked in and committed to their assignments throughout the entire game. It requires the kind of physical intensity and collective focus that is genuinely hard to maintain for a full 40 minutes. And it requires a level of athletic superiority that allows you to recover from mistakes and close out on shooters and contest shots at the rim in ways that a physically lesser team simply cannot replicate. New Zealand are not a bad basketball team. They are a professional national program with real players who have real skills and real experience at the international level. And the fact that they were held to 46 points is a testament to how suffocating and how relentless the Team USA defense was from the opening tip to the final buzzer. Now let us bring everything back to the central point, the one that ties all of these individual elements together into a single, clear, and undeniable conclusion. and that is the question of what Caitlin Clark means to this team, to the WNBA, and to women's basketball as a whole. She is the best point guard in the world right now, and I want to be clear that this is not a matter of personal opinion or fan loyalty or any of the other things that people try to dismiss it as when they do not want to engage with the actual evidence. The evidence is right there in the results. It is in the way defenses react to her presence on the court. It is in the television ratings that go up when she plays. It is in the sponsorship deals and the merchandise sales and the ticket prices and every other measurable indicator of commercial and sporting value. And the people who are responsible for making decisions about how Team USA is run, who starts, who gets minutes, who is trusted with the ball in the most important moments. Those people need to look at all of that evidence honestly and make decisions based on what it tells them rather than on the basis of relationships, reputation, or a sense of obligation to players who have served the program well in the past. Because what the New Zealand game showed very clearly is what this team looks like when Clark is given the freedom and the responsibility to truly run the show. And the answer is a 101-46 final score. And that is a result that speaks for itself in a language that requires no translation. The broader message that this performance sends to the rest of the women's basketball world is also worth spending some time on, because it is significant. Every national program that is preparing to face Team USA in competition in the coming months and years watched that game and came away with a very clear and very sobering understanding of what they are up against. Every WNBA franchise that is going to have to prepare defensive game plans against Clark and her teammates in the upcoming season got a very loud and very public reminder of exactly how difficult that task is going to be, particularly now that she has added that mid-range game to an offensive arsenal that was already essentially impossible to fully contain. The landscape of women's basketball has been changing rapidly over the past couple of years, and that process of change is not slowing down. It is accelerating, and the teams and programs and individuals who are willing to accept that reality and adapt to it are going to be in a position to compete and thrive, while the ones who keep insisting on doing things the way they have always been done are going to find themselves being left further and further behind as the sport continues to evolve. What we are witnessing right now is a genuine turning point in the history of women's professional basketball, a moment where the old way of doing things is giving way to something new and more exciting and more commercially powerful than anything the sport has seen before, and Caitlin Clark is at the absolute center of that transformation. She is not just a great basketball player, she is the catalyst for a fundamental change in how women's basketball is perceived, how it is covered, how it is marketed, and ultimately how much money it generates and how that money gets distributed. The 101-46 victory over New Zealand was not just a basketball game. It was a very public and very emphatic demonstration of what women's basketball looks like at its absolute highest level, and it was a clear signal to everyone paying attention that the new era of the sport has officially and fully arrived. The players and coaches and executives who embrace that new era are going to be part of something genuinely historic, and the ones who resist it are going to find themselves on the wrong side of a transformation that is already well underway and shows absolutely no signs of slowing down. The upcoming professional season is going to be extraordinary to watch, and if what we saw against New Zealand is any indication of what is coming, then fans of women's basketball are in for something very special indeed.